this is David for Big Bits, and in this video we're going to take a look at our next iteration of the scripting tutorial, and that is scripting tutorial 3, and we are going to be discussing triple many moving averages. And that sounds kind of confusing, but essentially all we're doing is we're having 3 moving averages plotted on the chart like we did before, but instead of having the moving averages fixed as being either a simple moving average or an exponential moving average, now we're going to have the ability to change which type of moving average we use for each of these lines. So I'll go ahead and show you the end product here, and you can see, of course, the 3 lines, but the big change is in our inputs on our settings is for each moving average. So for moving average 1, we can change it to have a different type of moving average. Let's have it be an exponential moving average. You can see that it changed, and since an exponential moving average usually follows price a little bit more closely than a simple moving average, you can see it's a little bit closer to the actual price. Let's go ahead and change it back for the video, and we can go ahead and discuss kind of what we've done. Now, the first thing you've noticed obviously were the inputs. How did we have it set up to where you could select whether you're going to use an SMA, EMA, RMA, or WMA? Now, if you've watched the last videos, you know that the inputs are handled by storing a variable with the result of the input. Now, the inputs that we're using are defined by an options array or a dictionary, whatever you want to call it. We're using options. Now let's go to the input documentation, and you can see the options parameter here. This is useful to provide users with a list of constant values they can choose from when using a drop-down. So for example, in this documentation, the options you would have in the drop-down are A or B, and it shows you how to use those values here. So you can see that choice was assigned to the value in the options list that you defined. It's pretty simple. So in our case, we have 4 different moving averages we're working with right now. We have the RMA, the SMA, the EMA, and the WMA. Now, we had to store a moving average type for every moving average that we have in the list. So we have 3 moving averages. So we need 3 types to be stored, 1 for each moving average. So this is the moving average type for MA1, 2, and 3, and so forth if you wanted to add more for whatever reason. Now, that alone doesn't make it to where it will actually change what's plotted here. We actually have to tell it to calculate the correct moving average to display the correct data. So for example, if all we did was just change and add this input, if we changed it from SMA to EMA, it would still show the SMA lines and there wouldn't be any difference. In order to make it to where you do change it and it will recalculate those values, you have to actually do the logic to where it'll look and see which moving average it's supposed to use and use the appropriate moving average calculation. Now, I'm going to expand our code here so maybe it's a little bit easier to see. We're going to start learning how to use logical conditions, and the most simplest logical condition you can use in just about any programming or scripting language is a simple if statement. Basically, you're checking to see if a certain condition is true, then you will do a certain action. So for example, if our MA1 type is equal to the SMA option that we defined, then we're going to run the SMA calculation based on the close, which is the current price, and the amount of look back period that we wanted to use. So for MA1, the default was 50. Our MA1 type was SMA, so it would check our MA1 type was SMA, yes, so it's now going to execute the SMA calculation using the close price for all of the candles that it's using, and it's going to look back 50 periods to calculate the SMA. Now, there's something in here you may not have seen or be familiar with other languages, and this is, in my opinion, fairly unique to Pine Script. I haven't delved into tons of different programming languages, but for the ones I'm familiar with, this is kind of different. So in Pine Script, you can set your variable value equal to the if statement. Now, what's going to happen is your if statement is going to return a value, and it's always the last function or expression that you use is returned back. So in this case, setting the MA1 value, which is where our green line is dependent on what the last function is that we call here. So when we calculate the SMA here, it sets the value of MA1. Now, if you're not too familiar with coding, you'll notice this looks really similar. You know, are we setting MA1 equal to if? No, we're setting it equal to whatever the condition is that gets executed last in this if statement, this nested if statement, I guess you would call it. But you'll also notice there's just one equal sign here and two equal signs here. Now that's because here we are comparing MA1 type to SMA. You use two equal signs in Pine Script to do comparisons to see if a condition is true or false. So if we did less than, the condition would simply be that. And then it'll tell you whether or not the MA1 is the MA1 type is less than that. But that doesn't make any sense. We're comparing strings there. But just to give you an example, we're comparing the type to the string here, and if they're equal, then it's going to execute this. And it did. And the single equal symbol, that just means we're setting the value. So whatever is on the left, we're setting that value to whatever is on the right. And since it's an if statement, it's whatever expression gets calculated. I know I probably rambled on a bit about that, just trying to explain it for those of you who were interested a bit more. But essentially, it's doing what we want. We're setting the MA value of MA1 to the calculated value based on whatever moving average that we have selected. Now, we continue to do this for our other moving averages as well, MA2, and we make sure to use the correct MA type. We got to make sure that we replace MA1 with MA2 here to make sure it's comparing the correct moving average type and no longer still using MA1, and also with the periods as well. And then you continue to do this for your other ones, and now you can plot your moving averages that we set with our logical if statements. So there actually was quite a bit of work here if you're new to programming or scripting to understand what's going on. Now, do keep in mind with Pine Script, you have to get the spacing and the indentations on each of these lines after the if statement absolutely correct, or they won't execute correctly. That's kind of what I've learned. So when you run an if statement, the next line I believe has to be 4 spaces in or so, but just using the tab, just using the tab key will take care of that, and it'll give you the correct spacing. If your next line isn't at the correct spacing beneath the if statement, it won't execute. So you'll notice every if statement, the line that we want to execute as part of that logic is always indented by 4. Now, when you want to end your if statement and do something else, the else statement needs to be directly below the if or at the beginning of the line. So you can see here, it's not directly below the if, but it's back at the beginning of the line. And these need to be done correctly. From what I have learned, that may not actually be the case, but I do know it works perfectly well, just like this. So do keep that in mind. All right, so that pretty much takes care of this indicator. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. If you like this video, please leave a like on the video and subscribe, because we are doing several more. I'll go ahead and I will show you. Well, first of all, I'll show you the if statement here. The documentation is in the code. You can get more information about how it works here. But let's take a look at my profile. I want to show you the scripts that we've done and we are going to be covering in the videos. Let's go back here. Let's go to scripts. You can see we've gotten 6, and I've already started working on a 7th at this point, and we're going to continue doing more and more as time goes on. So if you're curious, please check out my profile on TradingView. It's going to be in the description of the video. Make sure you subscribe to YouTube here so that you can get updates on this series if you're wanting to learn more about calculating your own indicators. You can always take what you learn from this series and apply it to other ones as well. So I definitely appreciate everyone for watching. Thank you, and see you in the next video.